Hi, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for coming to the second of 3 sessions that we have today, and I hope you enjoyed Ruth and Sam. I thought there was no better way to underscore one of the pillars of this programming that we're trying to hit both the edification and the entertainment side, and food is a great way to do both. It's a portal into both of those things. And today's, this late morning discussion is really going to explore that again with Amber Tamm and Anochi Odinga. And I am going to, in just a minute, welcome our own Anna Davis to the stage, who is going to be the interlocutor. Anna Davis is a native of New Mexico, and then came east for her undergraduate degree at Hampshire College. She studied environmental sociology there. She farmed in Western Massachusetts, and then came even further east as the assistant manager of the Beach Hill Farm, College of the Atlantic program. And 2 years later, she became the co-manager with her partner, David Levinson. And those two have absolutely transformed College of the Atlantic's Beach Hill Farm in every way, shape, and form. She is one of my favorite people in the world to work with. And it's a really hard job, right? You have to be an excellent farmer, obviously. You have to know your way around plants and animals. But you are also the public face of the institution. You're a manager of people, and you're a teacher of and a collaborator with students. And that is hard to find all in one person, but we really found it in Anna Davis. So welcome to the stage, Anna.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Darren. So as Darren said, I'm Anna, manage Beach Hill Farm. And welcome to the Summer Institute at College of the Atlantic on unceded Wabanaki territory. I'm really excited about the discussion I'm about to have with Amber and Anochi. To be honest, I hadn't heard of them before I started this process of researching their work, but it's been amazing. They're two really incredible, inspiring people, and I'm very excited to talk to them and to talk to them in this setting. So Amber Tamm is a graduate of College of the Atlantic, born and raised in Brooklyn, and has worked as a horticulturalist, a florist, landscaper, and urban farmer. She has farmed in the city for the nonprofit Project Eats and the nearly 6-acre Brooklyn Grange rooftop farm, in addition to starting her own floral design business. She has been working as an intersectional community strategist for the Regenerative Agricultural Coalition Farmers Footprint. Her work embodies her mission, which is to guide people, and specifically people of color, towards not only connecting with the earth, but in showcasing how careers can actually be had working with the earth. Anochi Odinga is a community chef, farmer, and community organizer from Harlem, and has spent the last year cooking thousands of meals for vigils, protests, and community gatherings in New York City in support for the fight for racial justice. He has also worked to establish and cook for what are known as community fridges, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, providing free prepared meals to his community. Amber and Anochi have both recently moved to the West Coast to continue their work, and that's where we'll be speaking with them from today. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Amber and Anochi. Hi, Amber. Hi, Anochi.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for making the time to speak with me today. As a farmer, I know mid-July is one of the hardest times to get away from the work we're doing. So I really appreciate you both taking the time today. We're really happy to have you. So,
Thank you. We're so happy.
So just to jump in, I want to first question, 2020 has been so challenging and upending for so many of us. And I'm curious to know, what have the last 18 months been like for you? And throughout that journey, where do you find yourself today?
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
I think the last 18 months for me have been rooted in really understanding the power of food and the power of the people, in terms of, when I was walking into Brooklyn Grange at the beginning of 2020, I was walking in there thinking I was just going to have a regular farm season, and it turned out to be way more than that once COVID hit. And once George Floyd's death came, and rest in peace to George Floyd, because he really set off a totally different realm in which New York City was orienting to mutual aid. And that's kind of where me and Anochi came together to really create ways to not only feed people, but to make sure that they were getting the best produce to the chef, and then the chef making sure that he's giving the best food to the people. So really what I saw from my lens on the rooftop of Brooklyn Grange and working with Dan Barber and doing all the things is I saw people really coming together in the name of dismantling white supremacy in the food system, while also saying, how do we support each other?
I'll say the last 18 months for me have been spent, the majority of my time has been used to step into being a community chef full time. Before 2020, I had just been sort of part-time with it, just doing the minimal of, going to drop off food somewhere and then calling it a day. As the protests started to increase, I began cooking directly for protests, and from there it grew into cooking for vigils, cooking for events, cooking for families, cooking for community fridges. So I think the past 18 months for me have absolutely been used to step into being a community chef full time and understanding what it takes to do that and how much work is needed to be done so that I can actually sustain it.
Thanks. It's an incredible amount of work you've both been doing, and it's not hard. It's not easy. There's a lot I want to ask you more about the last year and your specific history and how you've gotten here. But I also wanted to start off, the title of this talk is Food Access Does Not Equal Food Equity. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that and explain the difference between food access and food equity.
Well, a good example of what food access and food equity. The last place that we lived was Colonial Beach, Virginia. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine last week, and as I was explaining it to him, it sort of hit me a lot harder because I wasn't fully aware of how severe things were. Colonial Beach is an area where it's almost directly connected to the Potomac. There are like different channels, different ways you can fish, or different areas to swim and different things like that. But each and every option for food is not a sustainable option at all. The biggest place that they have is a drive-through McDonald's, and right next to that is a Food Lion, which it's not the kind of place that has an organic section. It's not the kind of place that will give you fair trade options. It's a really large grocery store, and everything in it is conventional. Mm-hmm. So the majority of the time that we were shop there, we were getting either the same things or we were going there for snacks. The other options you have are pizza, a country cafe, which is essentially the kind of place where potatoes are a side dish of vegetables, but these potatoes are French fries. Yeah. And the only other store that was there was a Walgreens or Rite Aid, if I'm not mistaken. So every single option you had there was nothing nutrient dense. And the conversation that we had last night actually about East New York was pretty similar. You know, there isn't a grocery store for 20, 30 minutes, you know. There isn't a grocery store that's actually going to give you something you need for over an hour. So you'll have to be traveling either on the train for over an hour or walk 20, 30, 40 minutes and still not get what you need. And it's the same thing in a place like Colonial Beach. You know, you're either going to drive an hour and a half to a organic food store, or you're going to be okay with saying, yeah, I don't have a choice but to eat McDonald's every day. You know?
Yeah, it's astounding how in a country with so much opulence, so many people are living with that inaccessibility to good food, to culturally appropriate food, to healthy food. So I guess just segueing from that, Anochi, can you talk about, you call yourself, or your title is community chef, and I'm curious, what is a community chef, and what is the work, what is the actual work that you've done in your community as a community chef, if you can talk to us about that.
Definitely. Well, the first thing I always say about community chefs is community chefs were community chefs before they knew it.
Amen.
You know, and community chefs existed thousands of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So my experience with it, it sort of came with other people calling me a community chef. I didn't fully know what it was until someone had directly told me, like, yeah, you're a community chef. And the more I started to do the work, the more it started to click. The basic idea of a community chef is essentially somebody who's using their skills as a chef, somebody who can take that fine dining training, all of those hours in the kitchens working on a line to come back and create really incredible meals for their community. You know, that also extends into, you know, organizing for your community. That also extends into setting things up for your community and, you know, making sure you have access to the things that you need for your community, which has been my personal like biggest issue is having to travel long distances or having to do large amounts of work throughout the day in order to bring quality meals to the community. One of the things that became clear to me over the past year is another community chef I have been working with, Jaime, who essentially told me the important thing of doing this work is making sure that you're providing that quality before quantity.
Yes.
And I think coming from a nonprofit mentality, I had to really shed that and say, all right, I can do 50 meals of something really amazing, really nutrient dense, really fun, instead of doing 1,000 meals that are just going to feed 1,000 people and not do anything for them. Mm-hmm. You know, so the majority of that work as a community chef is taking what isn't amazing and making it amazing. You know, taking like USDA boxes and saying, yeah, these are the scraps that we're using. This is what we have access to, but we can turn it into something beautiful. And a lot of the times, many of the chefs that I would work with were coming up with really incredible ideas on things we could do with food that was not always organic, you know, food that was not always nutrient dense, but as we're going through it and creating something that is nutrient dense, you know, we're going through it, we're creating something that is important. We're creating something that can be given to someone and say, here's your meal for the day. And it's actually doing something inside of your body and giving you that feeling in your head of, wow, this is a really amazing thing that someone just did for me, you know, because a lot of people, like we said, just don't have access to it. There's a lot of people in New York City that don't have stoves, don't have access to power, you know, people whose buildings have been out of gas for months. So, you know, I think one of the main components of being a community chef and a big part of the work is taking nothing and turning it into something.
My understanding was that you started off using these community fridges, so placing community refrigerators or fridges actually around New York City, correct me if I'm wrong, but that you started out putting in fresh produce and then realized that people potentially didn't have access to stoves, didn't have access to gas, didn't have time, capacity to go home and actually cook the food, the raw food that were being placed in there, and that eventually you realized that actually prepared food is what people needed most. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that was actually something Amber had brought up to me. I was thinking more along the lines of, quantity. So my thinking was if I can do 200 wraps and send them off somewhere, I can still take the produce and just stick it in the fridge, and it got down to the point where Amber and I were having a conversation, and she was essentially saying, like, this component is going to be something that really starts to change with these fridges. It's like people are coming in and they're expecting food, but each person that opens up the fridge is either going to leave something behind because they don't know how to use it, or leave something behind because they don't even know what it is, and that was something we saw with things like radicchio and parsnips. Every time we would have things like radicchio and parsnips, you would see people were either asking what it was and didn't know what to do with it, or they just simply didn't want it because it wasn't worth the work. So one of the things that we started doing as I began my work with the organization Our Food NYC, we started doing meals from USDA boxes. And the chef I had been directly working with was essentially saying this was going to be the next step of community chefing. It was going to shift from delivering meals to families or delivering meals to protesters to creating meals specifically for community. Instead of it being a response to something, it was going to be something that would create a full-time job, So as I was going on just delivering produce, Amber was one of the main people that told me, like, yeah, you should be doing full meals with this. You should be taking all of these vegetables and giving these people exactly what they need, so that they don't have to worry about, I have all my produce, but now I don't have a way to cook it, or I have a way to cook it, but it's not coming out the way I want. Right? Now I have to go out and get oil, or anything like that. So that was one of the big shifts for me, was understanding the best way, one of the best ways to really assist people and do that direct aid was taking this produce and creating meals for it.
Also, that means a huge amount more work on your part too. My understanding is that you were cooking most of these meals in your home kitchen. There's this, I feel like in an interview the two of you had together, there's a description of you going like full sanitizing everything. Amber's not allowed in the kitchen, like everything is coming out of your home kitchen that you're distributing then around the city.
It definitely is.
I just want to say that was true. That was true.
Yeah, there were definitely a few times where I didn't let her in the kitchen. I mean, there were definitely some times where I would just kind of close it off to everybody and be like, the only way you're coming in here is if you wash your hands, wear gloves, put your mask on, put your hat on, like wear some shoes, like we're following every HACCP rule. If you're cooking with me, then you're gonna be cooking in a real kitchen. I don't do the home cook variant because I'm following every single step that I need to, and that's also something that we've spoken about, where that takes a different layer of labor for sure. It is a lot to be cooking these meals at home. Over the past couple of months, I've been cooking for community here, and I'm starting to understand that it really is just not sustainable. It's not going to be possible for me to continue making 100 meals a day in my kitchen. It's not really going to be working out the way that it would work before, when I was doing quantity over quality of, when I first started, I was doing 100 wraps in the day, and it was all 2-3 pans cooked and then scooped in the wraps. And now that I'm taking more time, now that I'm starting to grow with it and doing more specific meals, it's starting to shift a little bit. So I'm in the market for a kitchen space. I'm hoping I'll get lucky with something soon. But I'm definitely understanding that cooking at home isn't really the best idea.
And it's incredible that you used what you had to do what you needed to do. So that's an amazing feat, but I understand the need for adequate facilities sometimes to be able to kind of expand the work that we're doing. Another question for you, Anochi, and Amber as well. So I run an organic vegetable farm, and we all know that most of this small-scale, locally grown food is not getting into communities that need it most. And you mentioned that a lot of your food that you were getting for the community fridges and for the meals that you were preparing over the past year, where it was like the scraps of what was left over, the USDA boxes, conventionally grown. Where do you see the potential, the need? How do you see these smaller local organic farms, regenerative farms, participating in these programs, and why is that important?
I think community fridges is going to be one of the best. And I'm praying, my prayer right now is that community fridges becomes more of an implementation in more cities. But I really truly think that that's going to be one of the best, most immediate ways that small regenerative farms can give back to their communities where they are. And I say that from a place of it's already happening. In New York City right now, Mark Kimball and Kristen Kimball, who wrote The Dirty Life, their farm and their beautiful team of people and their beautiful land have already oriented themselves to say how much food can we give to 4 community fridges at the top of Manhattan. And so watching how they're moving, where they're giving regenerative biodynamic grains, milk, all dairy products, all veg, all meat, watching them move these products into community fridges and watching people line up for these things outside of their community fridge has shown me that, in my opinion, that's going to be one of the most powerful ways to meet that need immediately. In the future, what I would love to see is I would love to see a coalition of small, regenerative, biodynamic, organic farms come together and orient and say, how do we grow for mutual aid? So I think that was my questioning when all of the protests started with George Floyd is, what is my position as a farmer and my farmer identity? How do I show up for my community who are protesting, who are demanding justice from the state? What is my placement as a farmer? And I want to bring more farmers into that conversation so we can crowd around community organizers and around community chefs.
Thank you for that. It feels, and it's an enormous challenge as well. You write how unsustainable sometimes it seems to make your living as a farmer that respects the land, is feeding low-income communities, and is simultaneously maintaining a sustainable livelihood for you and all of the people working with you. How do you balance that? How do you see addressing all of those different challenges moving forward as a farmer?
I think one of the hardest realizations I had to learn from myself, I don't want to speak on behalf of other farmers, but what I had to really learn from myself is I'm not interested in taking things out of Mama Earth and then giving it to people for the price of money. That doesn't work in my alignment, as I'm not trying to bring pieces of plants together and say, this is how much it is because I need this for my livelihood. I'm more so saying, what does it look like to return agriculture to what it all originally was, which wasn't a business. It was a way of life in support of your community. And a part of that means, right, this might sound a little bit like philanthropy, but that's more so what I'm stepping into. But I'm not looking to profit off of my farm. I'm looking for any profit that comes to the farm to go straight to the community chefs and into the people. I'm looking for any money that comes into this farm vision to go straight into rehabilitating the land, to rehabilitate the community chef, to rehabilitate the people. I'm oriented in saying, as a farmer, I'm going to have to find another way and have to be really creative in that way to have my own income. But that income cannot come from Mama Earth and the people who are malnourished and in poverty.
Thank you for that. That is, after listening to your work over the last few days, I was out harvesting this morning, and just the weight of pulling stuff from the earth, bunching it, packaging it, selling it, felt so much more acute, and I felt so much more aware of that withdrawal that I was having, what I was taking. So I think it's something incredibly admirable to strive for, of how do we reinvent this food system and reinvent how we're growing food. Amber, you've worked as a farmer in so many different capacities. I've heard you talk about working in cannabis production, working in Hawaii, working on large-scale conventional agriculture in the US, sheep herding, working with poultry. As you move forward, and together, as you guys move forward into your next farming enterprise or into this next vision, I was wondering if you could talk about how you characterize your farming philosophy. If you can talk about what your growing practices are, and how you're thinking about them moving forward.
For me, I'm really rooting into, like I just said previously, like I'm really rooting into, it is not my truth to make farming a business. I have seen so many farmers really put their body at risk, put their mind at risk, by trying to make farming a job. And with the USDA admitting to their racism with Black farmers and still not doing anything about it, it's very clear that Black farmers are not going to get their resources that they need to make farming a business, at least not anytime soon. So I'm moving into the framework of farming for mutual aid and farming for other communities that are creating safe spaces for people. And for me, that looks like, one, I think that because I'm not operating on business anymore, and I'm operating with people who understand how much work farming takes, that frees me up so much to be able to move at the pace that's proper for me and my body. When you're running a farm business, you kind of have to run around the markets. But because I'm running around people, because I'm running around my community, I'm free to be able to move at my own pace and welcome others into the farm space to move at their own pace. And so all of this that I'm talking about is the beginning, the little tiny beginnings of dismantling white supremacy in the food system. And that's my biggest philosophy, is the way in which this food system has been created has been off the backs of our ancestors who were enslaved to be here. And so a part of our work is to say, how do we let go of that and move into something that's way more nourishing for us and the people that we're working with? And in that freedom, we're able to then put that into the ground through our fingertips with our energy, and able to disperse that into people who are actually hungry. And all of that energy, I think, personally, is felt. But I think the beauty of it, once again, is as a farmer, I'm able to align with my community. I'm not this farmer that's going to be out, in a very rural area and disconnected with what's going on in the cities. As a farmer in a rural area, I'm keeping my identity secured by saying, I'm in tune with what's happening with our people in the city, what's happening with our current events pertaining to houseless people, malnourished people, BIPOC people who are in poverty. And by keeping that pulse, I'm a part of that work now. And that's what feels very, very nourishing for me. I also see myself orienting to more community chefs and saying, how can we farmers help you? Because at the end of the day, I think there also needs to be a reestablishment of the farmer-chef relationship. And I think for so long, chefs have been at the forefront of everything, and farmers have been in the back, kind of invisible. So I'm now also seeing, my new farm philosophy is, what does it look like for farmers and chefs to grow together, literally, but also figuratively? What does it look like for a farmer to enter into the mutual aid community chef world and help out and get that experience? And then for these chefs to come onto the farm and have a farming experience, so that once again, we're widening we're breaking those barriers that the food system has always had. Chefs are over here, farms are over here. So I'm also seeing those boundaries being broken and more creativity flowing between the farmer and chefs, and more identities of, I am a farmer who has chef experience, or I am a chef who has farming experience. So I think, in conclusion, I guess I'm looking for a more creative farming experience rather than a more business-oriented one.
Thank you. That's really clear. And from my understanding, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, but that vision for you has changed over in your journey over the last few years. And I'm curious if you can talk about how that shift occurred, that you started out really looking to, from my understanding of starting your own farming enterprise as a business. You talked about wanting also to be a flower farmer, and what that journey has looked like to get you seeing all of the barriers time after time that are up against, especially farmers of color, indigenous farmers who are trying to farm for their communities. What was that journey like to get to this very different place that you are at today, from wanting to start your own farm, business enterprise, to where you're at right now?
I think I'm super honored to be a face of agriculture in that way. And I just want to welcome that. Like, I'm very honored for people in ag to be watching me walk this walk and watch me change my mind every time. I think that is something that the agriculture and food industry needs to see, is what happens when you don't just walk into a business, but you actually study agriculture and you actually go into different ways of doing it to figure out what it is that you need to do. So even in that, I see so much value for all of us. I think I started off wanting a business because I didn't see anybody else in agriculture not having a business. I even saw, nonprofit businesses form. I've seen nonprofits welcome in funds, but also they're still selling produce. And I think when I was a younger woman, I wasn't courageous enough to really admit out loud that I wasn't interested in a business, or that I don't know how a business can even function in agriculture now with climate change really coming up. And really, I have 2020 to thank for totally breaking me out of the routine loop thinking I was having in terms of becoming a business, because that's what all farmers do. 2020 truly set me free, because years before I was saying that food shortages were on the way for New York City. I think Anochi knows that for years I was always like, I'm worried about New York City because everything here is coming in. Everything is coming in on a truck. And for a lot of places, we're functioning like that. And my worry is that at some point, that's going to shift. And I think that's because I had lived in Hawaii and I had seen that happen before. And so going back to New York City, I was worried. And so once it actually actualized in New York City for COVID, once people were aware that, wow, food shortages are real, and if these trucks can't get in, we can't get our food. That was the biggest pivot of, we need to have food here in New York City, or we need to always have food around us for our communities because we can't be dependent on the trucks. And that's where I really gave birth to myself admitting out loud, I need to do something different. I need to do something community oriented that's beyond a community farm or beyond a community urban farm, because those spaces are very small and limited. But what does it look like to have a huge community farm that's not at all focusing on profit, but focusing on people? So I really have 2020 to thank. I think right in that intersection is with this round of Black Lives Matter that happened last year, Black farmers were at the forefront. We became pushed up by our Black communities to be at the forefront, to put our needs out there, because we were saying we're willing to help, but we need resources to help everything that's happening. And so once I saw the food shortages, and then once I saw Black community crowding around Black farmers, that positioned me to say, what is my vision? And I think with all of my experience in business and, you know, myself as a farmer being commodified, exploited, abused in so many different ways, it led me to say I have to create something that has never been done before, and something that truly a lot of the agricultural realm thinks lowly of and doesn't value.
That makes me think, yesterday, a question was posed to Leah Penniman asking, do you see this system to be broken, our food system to be broken, or is it functioning exactly as it was intended to function? Is this just a product of our capitalist system? And what I'm getting from you, and I'd be interested to actually pose that question to you, is that you saw that there was no system that you could actually be a part of with what was available to you.
Yeah, I think that question is perfect, because my reflection on that is, yeah, I think what is happening in ag is what has been happening in ag since our ancestors were brought here to be enslaved for ag. I think if we really want to see farmers in their full liveliness, if we want to see food be what it was, or even 1% closer to what it was in the past in terms of nutrient density, if we want to see malnourished BIPOC communities uplifted and healthy, then we have to completely shift, because the paradigm that we're existing in has been alive for very long. And I know Leah Penniman talks a lot about this and writes a lot about this, so I would encourage y'all and escort y'all to read those texts. But I think with referencing that history and seeing where organic, regenerative, and biodynamic ag is heading in terms of still focusing on profit and not focusing on the reach of their food and how far it could really go in terms of helping and uplifting, then yes, we have to totally revamp. I think to categorize the food system as broken or not, I'm not really here for that conversation, but I am here to say we can look at the history and analyze it and see all the things that are wrong or right, et cetera. But the reality is that we need to harvest from what's right in the history. We need to hold on to that and take the technological tools that we have today, the people that we have today, and create something new and nourishing for all people. But me in particular and us in particular are centered on how do we first empower the communities that were overlooked, which are the BIPOC, malnourished, poverty-stricken communities. And so just in designing for those communities, that's already starting something new. That's never been done.
Makes sense. You have talked about this pivot you've done from, we talked about this pivot that you've done from going from a for-profit farming enterprise to what you're beginning to create now. And in looking forward and in pulling from our system what's good, shedding what's bad, when you look to the future and you look at all the different enterprises and projects and groups that we're going to need to get us to a more equitable place, do you see a place for small-scale, for-profit farm businesses run by Indigenous farmers or people of color? Do you see that to be a possibility? Do you see a role for these for-profit businesses that operate as small-scale businesses?
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be a marketplace for any small-scale farmers. And I think why small-scale farmers are essential, especially in the realms of organic and regenerative ag, is because of the scalability. I think people need to see practice at play with business, right? They need to see regenerative ag techniques going on small-scale farms and see how that's translating into business, into profit for them. But at the same time, there needs to also be a vein in agriculture that's centered on feeding people who are hungry and are poor. I think those things can exist at the same time. So I'm definitely not here to say for-profit small-scale farming is irrelevant. I'm here to say that for-profit small-scale farming is for people who can afford it. And the communities that we come from and the communities that we represent, one, have no access to regenerative or organic produce, which means that we need to bring it to them. And that kind of looks, that's mutual aid. That's different than what for-profit is doing. So I think in widening our circle into saying those for-profit farmers are going to maintain doing that while we stretch out and do this, we're meeting the needs of the people wherever they are.
It makes me think, I think for so long, and when I started farming, and something that has really shifted for me is this sense of, that we have in America, of the poor white farmer, and something, and how little, because it's so much work, and you don't make any money, and there's no resources, how can you possibly expect these people to also provide food at an affordable rate? And something that has really shifted for me is backing up and realizing, especially for farmers from my background, my heritage, is the incredible privilege that I have to be doing the work that I am doing with the resources that I have. And with that, which is what I'm hearing you say as well, it's not only that I can, but it's the deep responsibility to provide to low-income communities. That it seems like for me, it's been a real paradigm shift about a self-identity and an identity of who farmers are. And then with that shift, what then becomes our role in changing this food system. I appreciate you reflecting that back. I think it's a really important point. I'm curious what it's like. So much of your work has been place-based. You're both from New York. You ended up doing so much of this work in New York for your community, and you've now shifted across the country to do similar work, and I'm curious what that transition has looked like, and how you are able to find your place in this new community, in this new land that you're currently on.
I will start by saying, I think after 2020 last year, after I had released my GoFundMe and was able to secure 100K in 6 days, and that 100K being given to me for the sake of land access and purchasing land, I knew on some level that 2021 would be a little bit of a hopping across the US kind of thing in terms of searching for the right land to engage with and searching while also looking for the right community to work with. So there's two coordinates there for me. It's like the land itself and what that looks like, how that feels, is it affordable, and also the community and how we're going to work with the community aspect. But I think the gift that we are being given right now, first and foremost in Oregon, is Indigenous and Black solidarity. So the land that we're currently rooting into, that we're currently on right now, is owned by a Choctaw woman. And I think for us that feels solidifying in the sense of, in rooting for Black liberation and in centering on BIPOC people, we need to have an understanding between Black and Indigenous folks first, as we have been, both communities have been very harmed by the past of agriculture. So I think that is one of the gifts that we are receiving and sinking into. I'll let you go and say how it's been being here.
It's an adjustment, I think. I know for me, it's quite difficult to have left with the track that I was on in terms of the work I was doing. I sort of left at an extremely prime moment, and I have definitely had some moments of being homesick, and I see my community doing work that I was supposed to be a part of. But I also have began to understand that the need for specifically community chefs is really huge in so many parts of the world. There's actually someone in Kenya that I've been looking at who's doing similar work, and he's going into places that are being the most affected by COVID. And, that is one of the things that's been helping me out in terms of adjusting and not being in my home and having left for the reasons that we left. I definitely have begun to understand that wherever I go, I'm gonna find a place where people need to be fed. If we really get up to the moon and get up to Mars and have all our colonies up there, then there's still gonna be people who are less fortunate and need help. So for me personally, yeah, it is hard. It's definitely something that I struggle with. It's definitely something that is not easy for me, but it's also, as I've said before, it's a really honorable thing, and I think that's something I just keep going back to, is the massive amount of honor that comes with the feeling of being able to do what I do in different places, being able to say, like, yeah, I can settle down in a place like Central Oregon because there's already community here, and Amber has already said, you've been here a very short amount of time and you've already fed a lot of people. So,
It's true.
It's something that has really been helpful over the past couple of months in terms of adjusting.
I'm glad to hear that. I find that often, I know that feeling of when you get to a new place and you're doing the right work there. I feel that it changes because the community pulls you in, as opposed to you trying to scratch your way into a community when it's not quite the right fit. And that feeling is amazing. And I'm glad you guys have found that there. So I just had one more question, and I'm curious, what advice do you have to young people wanting to get into the work that you're doing, either through working as community chefs, through farmers, through, what do you say to them?
When I was able to speak to College of the Atlantic students, when I was welcomed into their classrooms digitally, I think one of the main things that I presented to them is agriculture absolutely is in need of young people, but we're also in need of a change, of a reckoning. And so I would encourage any person who is interested in farming or any type of agricultural work to come in and learn and read the history, but also please be creative, because we need new solutions, because there are new problems. And I also just want to have that as an open invitation. I know I walked into ag and it was not an open invitation for me. I was met with a lot of resentment, especially being in the body of a Black woman. I was met with resentment constantly. So I just want to be an open gate to say, there's tons of room for new faces in ag, and there's tons of rooms for new ideas, and that's what we want to welcome. This is fertile ground for anyone who is trying to make change. And I say that because, as I've said in a lot of my work and my interviews and etc., I think if you have one hand in the earth and you really understand what's happening with food, you'll realize that this is the place where change can come out of in all other realms, in all other industries. So I don't want to say anything. I more so just want to welcome any of those new voices, any of those voices that are scared. I want to invite them to be courageous and come into this industry, because they are welcome.
It's a little bit, when I had initially heard this question, it was a little bit difficult for me to think about what a response would be. I have trouble thinking of myself as someone who's inspirational, someone who younger people are looking to for advice or inspiration, but I sort of had to think of it as a point of view question. If I were to be sitting down somewhere in a park and a young aspiring community chef came up and asked for advice, what would I say? I think the first thing I would say is that it's really hard. I think the first thing I would tell them is that this is extremely difficult work, and it takes a lot of different layers of labor. And I think it's one of those thankless jobs where you'll do so much and you'll give so much, yet you'll still be met with certain things that will confuse you and leave you in a space of saying, do I want to continue doing this? And I think that's just the realness that comes with being a modern community chef, because like I said, community chefs existed for years and years, but to be a community chef now, to choose to be a community chef now, is not going to be something that's easy, and I understand that's a big part of why we are in short supply, is because this is the kind of work that takes a lot of different type of labor. When I had initially first started talking about this, I would tell people one of the main things you would have to remember is being physically strong. And, I've sort of walked that back a little bit, because it's like, it doesn't just take physical strength. I think it shifted from being, you have to be able to carry lots of bags of groceries, but it's like, can you mentally handle waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, doing work for community, doing work for yourself, coming back to cook for your family, and then being able to have time to relax so that you can restart that cycle all over again?
Yeah.
Or maybe you'll be met with a day where everything is going wrong.
Yeah.
I've had days where literally everything I have tried has gone wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
it's still one of those questions, do I want to keep doing this? So the advice that I would give to any young community chef is remember that this is hard work. Remember that this is thankless work. And I hate to say that, but it is. It's going to be the type of work where you'll see those patterns in your life and you'll say, wow, I've always been doing this. I've always been in situations where I'm cooking for large amounts of people, whether it was when I was 12 or when I was 25. That's something that constantly remains true. But I also know, like, one of the best forms of payment is that feeling of honor that you get when you're able to bring something great to people. It does not even begin to compare to the feeling that you would get at a rush on a line. There's nothing like being at a pantry and giving your meal to someone. There's nothing like filling a community fridge with your food and seeing people line up for it. Like that's a lot better than being made head chef at the best restaurant in the world. Like, I'm sorry, and I've told people lots of times, like, my Michelin star came when someone who was struggling at an event that we were in for Black men who had been in prison. This was a young man who had spent a lot of time in prison and said that the best part of his weekend was my eggs. So for me, that's my Michelin star. I've already achieved the things that I've wanted to achieve. And I think one of the main things that community chefs have to remember is, it ain't easy. That's really the main thing I could say. But, if you're dedicated and you're sticking with it, if you're grinding with passion, as my brother and I would say, then you're going to be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve. And no, it's not going to be easy, but you're going to get to the point that you want to get to if you're staying dedicated to what you believe in.
Thank you for that, and thank you again. We have 10 minutes for questions now, but I just wanted to say I really just appreciated your honesty and your openness and taking the time to answer these questions. I really appreciate it. It's been great talking with you both. And I'm gonna just open it up if there are any questions in the audience for Amber or Anochi.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and reflections, both of you. And I'm a economics master's student at COA right now, and would be really interested in some of your thoughts on some of the ways that we can make the economics of these systems make more sense. It was really striking to hear both of you speak about some of the absurdities that are really baked into the system, the precarity experienced by people that are trying to do the right thing, doing the sustainable thing and the socially just thing, and finding it's completely unaffordable, or they can't make it work as a business. It seems to me like there's a large role, potential role for the public sector to essentially demarketize some of these systems. Community fridges is a great idea. Why not have community cafeterias? Why not have free food?
I think that we may have lost Amber and Anochi.
Lost our team.
I think we're trying to call them back. I
Stand
was
by.
hoping that they were still there listening, because that was a great question, and it would be great to be able to hear back from them. But meanwhile, you're stuck looking at me.
What do you think, Anna?
Sorry. Much more interesting.
Well, we'll see. Let's give them another minute here. Does anyone want to jump into the conversation?
About the MDI Food Access Project. Yeah, so the MDI Food Access Project is a partnership between Open Table MDI, Healthy Acadia, College of the Atlantic, Share the Harvest, Beach Hill Farm, also Island Connections. Am I missing any of our other partners? It's a big group of people that have gotten together really through the vision of the directors working at Open Table to provide weekly food boxes to MDI residents, especially in towns that are not Bar Harbor, where there is more access, where there's the food pantry and the farmers market. And it launched this winter, and we're serving over 80 families a week with fresh produce, prepared food, and other pantry staples. And it's been an amazing experience, in part, because the work is so needed. But I think what's been most just exciting for me to be a part of it has been that community, has been all of these different partners coming together with all of this different information and expertise and knowledge of our community and knowing where the biggest gaps are and what needs to be filled, and doing that as a collaboration has been amazing. I will say that we were able to launch the program through a grant we received from the Stephen and Tabitha King Foundation, and have continued to source funding through other grants and donation opportunities. And it's so far, it's been successful because of the amount of people that have come together to make it what it is. Including like Island Connections coming in at one point and being like, we're providing transportation, and to be able to deliver those boxes. Courtney and students at COA saying, we're jumping in to help write grants. Healthy Acadia, who say, we're jumping in to go to Beach Hill Farm to glean produce and package it and get it into the boxes. And then, of course, all of the different incredible organization feats that Open Table is doing, and subset of that MDI Food Access Project, just to get those boxes packed and cooked and distributed on the island. So that's the Food Access Project.
I had a question. If we still had Amber and Anochi, I would have asked, how do you scale community chefing? And it put me in mind very much of Jose Andres' work with World Central Kitchen. And I hope that out of this can come conversations between our guests and Jose Andres about how you do this on a larger and larger scale. But now that we have you, the great resource locally, I'm curious about how COA, because it is a philanthropically supported farm, can do more and more in Down East Maine, where there's a lot of food insecurity. And I always think of COA as being potentially the alternative to those land grant agribusiness programs all over the country. And so I'm interested in what your dreams are and where you would take this.
I think it's a really good question, and just in light of the conversation I was having with Amber and Anochi about that it's not only that we can, but that we have to, because of all of the privilege and resources that we have that have brought us to this, to where we're at. So it's not if, but when we're going to start and continue expanding on the projects we're already doing, but it's really important. As you know, Maine ranks 1 in New England of food insecurity. So even though we have much wealth on this island, and Hancock County, I think, is the second highest rate of food insecurity in the state. So Hancock County, we have that enormous wealth disparity. So the need is there. I think we can do things like what we're already doing, where we have our student-run Share the Harvest Food Access Program. I think it's through partnerships like the MDI Food Access Project. We recently implemented a sliding scale CSA at the farm, which I'm really excited about because it it's where I want to go with it, with the work we're doing at the farm. And the coolest thing about the sliding scale is that we weren't, taking note of people's income. It was an honor system. And so we said, these are our guidelines. This is what a box costs us. This is what we generally think to be a median income household, and then all of the varied circumstances that could change that for somebody, whether you have debt, medical bills, whether you own your own house, children. So I think that's really varied as well. And so we put that information out there. We said, this is what a box costs us. If you can pay more, please do. And when you do, you're supporting people in our community who can't. And if you can't afford the cost, what the box costs to us, please pay less. And my favorite part of that story, this is the first year we've done it, is that we tallied up, we got all of our CSA applications, we tallied up the totals, did the average, and we were smack dab in the middle. So we were exactly at the $250 it takes us to produce that box. And, because there were all these people that asked me, like, oh, if you do that, like, aren't you worried you're going to lose? And there was, pushback, like, you're going to lose money if you do this. Like, people are going to pay less than they can. And I found that to absolutely not be the case. And just, it got me really excited about using that model of having the same service be applicable to all of our community members, and that people contribute based what they can versus what it costs us. And so I think going back to your question, I think we have the capacity as a institution farm to play around with all of those different programs and experiment with them and figure out, and how do they work and how can we make them more accessible. So I guess that's what we're trying to do, and I think that there's a lot more that we can do. Yes.
Thank you. My husband worked as a teacher in an inner city school in Washington, D.C., and at lunchtime, he would typically see kids take lovely looking fresh peaches and throw them in the trash, or an orange that was unopened, because they didn't know what to do with it or didn't know if they liked it, that sort of thing. And this came up in the discussion with our speakers earlier, and I wondered, on your CSA project, the free boxes that go to the community, do you know whether people are having the same experience, that they're looking at a box and saying, what's a rutabaga? Don't know what to do with it, in the trash?
I'm not entirely sure. We've worked really hard. One thing we've worked really hard on is not making, I think traditionally CSAs are like, let's do variety, let's do diversity, let's throw a bunch of random stuff in there and see what happens. And I think for us, what we've found where our CSA participants have been most receptive is when we really make it stuff that when we put in the box what people know, what people like to cook with. We don't want to make it like hard for anybody. And I find that across the spectrum, we have people being like, what is a kohlrabi? And I think they're delicious, but we just know that we don't put kohlrabis in our CSA boxes because they're weird and people don't like them. And, that's what we have the farm stand for. And there we can people can pick and choose. And, but no, and I think that it just has to do with how do you make, what you're doing be responsive to your community. And so we heard for years and years and years, and then we tried things like newsletters and recipes and cooking classes, and those work to an extent, but also just hearing like, what do people want? That's what we're growing because we're your farm. I'm not here to, force my ideas about what vegetables you should be eating. I can grow what we can grow and try to fit that with what you're asking for.
Thank you, Anna.
We're done.